Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a single, powerful idea from Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book, Antifragile. And let me tell you, it's one of those ideas that's so fundamental, once you really get it, you'll start seeing the entire world in a completely new light. So let's start with a little puzzle that Taleb poses right at the beginning. Imagine you're mailing a box of delicate champagne glasses. You'd obviously write fragile all over it. But what if the contents were the exact opposite? What's the word you'd use for something that actually benefits from being tossed around and mishandled? Now, most of our brains immediately jump to words like robust or resilient, but hang on a second. Think about it. A robust object, maybe like a big block of steel, it just resists shocks. It stays the same. It's basically indifferent to being handled roughly. That's not a true opposite. That's more like a neutral middle ground. The true opposite is a package where you'd write something like, please mishandle. You'd want it to get thrown around because its contents wouldn't just survive the journey, they would actually get better. And since a word for this didn't exist, Taleb had to invent one. Antifragile. It describes the quality of things that actually gain from disorder. And this simple distinction, fragile versus antifragile, it gives us this incredibly powerful new framework for classifying pretty much everything in the world. Taleb calls it the triad. So this triad gives us a whole new way to look at reality. On one end, you have the fragile, kind of like the sword of Damocles in the Greek myth, hanging by a single thread, ready to shatter from one shock. In the middle, you've got the robust, like the phoenix, which can burn to ashes but is then reborn exactly the same. But on the far end, that's where you find the anti-fragile, perfectly embodied by the mythical Hydra. You cut off one of its heads, and two grow back in its place. It doesn't just recover, it gets stronger. This quote really just nails the core difference. And look, antifragility is the hidden property behind everything that actually evolves and lasts. Think about our own immune systems. A little exposure to germs makes it stronger, right? Or think about the restaurant scene in a big city. Individual restaurants are super fragile. They fail all the time. But that constant failure, that churn, makes the city's food scene as a whole incredibly vibrant and adaptive. It gets better from all that stress. Okay, so once you start looking at the world through this lens of the triad, you start to spot these hidden vulnerabilities and opportunities in places you never would have noticed before. And to really wrap your head around fragility, let's try another one of Taleb's little thought experiments. The answer is, well, it's a no-brainer, right? That single big stone isn't just 300 times more harmful. The damage is exponentially greater. This is a really key property he calls nonlinearity. For things that are fragile, harm doesn't just add up, it multiplies. And that, right there, is the signature of anything fragile. It is disproportionately wrecked by rare, huge shocks, what Taleb famously calls black swan events. And this explains why our complex modern systems, from the global economy to our healthcare, are so incredibly vulnerable. We've built them to handle all the little pebbles, but they are terrifyingly exposed to that one giant stone. This leads right into Taleb's central critique of our modern world. He argues that we have become completely obsessed with getting rid of all volatility. We try to protect everything from those small pebbles, thinking we're making things safer, but what we're actually doing is making our systems catastrophically fragile to that one big stone we're not expecting. I mean, just think about it. When central banks try to smooth out every little dip in the economy, they allow massive, unseen risks to build up, which leads to a way bigger crash down the line. When we over-sanitize our kids' lives, their immune systems never learn how to fight back properly. It's just like muscles. If they don't get exercised, they atrophy. Complex systems need a certain amount of stress and disorder to learn, adapt, and get strong. Okay, so if the world is just full of these hidden fragilities, how are we supposed to navigate it? Well, Taleb offers some really practical strategies for building anti-fragility into our own lives. His first big tool is something called the barbell strategy. Basically, it means you avoid that fragile, wishy-washy, medium-risk middle ground, and instead you go to both extremes at once. You become hyper-conservative and hyper-aggressive at the same time. So for an investor, this might mean putting 90% of your money in super safe government bonds and then taking that other 10% and putting it into highly speculative, high-risk startups. The beauty of this is that your downside is totally capped. The absolute worst that can happen is you lose that 10%. But your upside, it's potentially unlimited. You're protected from catastrophic failure, but you're also perfectly positioned to benefit from a rare, positive surprise. And this goes way beyond finance. Think of a writer who has a stable day job as a government clerk, but then writes wild experimental novels on the side. His second big strategy is this ancient idea called via negativa, which literally means the path of subtraction. It's all based on a really simple truth. We are far, far more certain about what is harmful than what is beneficial. For instance, we know for a fact that smoking is bad for you, but the latest superfood trend, that's usually just noise. So what this means is that the fastest way to improve almost anything is often to focus on removing the downside. Instead of adding a complicated new diet, just stop drinking sugary drinks. Instead of looking for the next great productivity hack, just eliminate distractions. By subtracting the stuff that makes you fragile, you let your natural anti-fragility shine through. And finally, all of this, the triad, the barbell, via negativa, it all builds to what is maybe the most important idea in the entire book. Because for Taleb, this isn't just about strategy, it's about ethics. He argues that the single greatest source of fragility in our world today comes from a really simple but toxic arrangement. When people are allowed to make high-stakes decisions for others while being totally insulated from the consequences of those decisions. Having skin in the game is this ancient filter that forces reality back into any system. It's simple. If you're wrong, you pay the price. It's the ultimate BS detector, because people who build fragile things are eventually weeded out by their own mistakes. And Taleb is relentless in applying this idea. Think of the banker who gets a giant bonus for taking on huge risks that later require a taxpayer bailout, or the pundit on TV who advocates for a war that their own kids will never have to fight in. In both cases, they get all the potential upside if they're right, and they transfer the entire downside to the rest of us if they're wrong. This leads to what Taleb calls the book's main ethical rule. It's a simple but profound idea. You should not be allowed to make yourself stronger by making other people weaker. This one principle, he argues, is the very foundation for a society that is just, robust, and sane. And that really is the ultimate challenge of Antifragile. It asks us to stop running away from randomness and to start embracing the small stressors that force us to learn, adapt, and grow. It's not about seeking destruction. It's about recognizing that a certain amount of disorder isn't just necessary for survival. It's the very source of life itself.